I screamed, "We're rich. We're rich," as the winning numbers flashed on the screen, my hands trembling so violently I nearly dropped the ticket. But then, just moments later, I heard my husband whisper the coldest words that crushed me in an instant: "Don't tell her you're my secretary." Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Linda, and I'm 68 years old. I live in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, where the smell of stale coffee mingles with decades of broken dreams. The walls are so thin I can hear Mrs. Rodriguez next door arguing with her son about money again. Every morning, I shuffle across the worn linoleum floor in my threadbare slippers, the same ones I've had for 15 years because buying new ones felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. That Tuesday morning in March started like any other. The radiator was clanking its familiar tune, and the March wind rattled our ancient windows. I was wearing my faded blue housecoat, the one with the small tear near the left pocket that I kept meaning to fix but never did. My arthritis was acting up again, making my fingers stiff as I tried to open the coffee canister. The apartment felt smaller than usual, pressing in on me with its peeling paint and water stains on the ceiling. I had bought that lottery ticket on impulse the week before. $5 from my grocery money, standing in line at the bodega on Houston Street while rain drummed against the windows. The Korean clerk, Mr. Kim, just nodded when I picked my numbers. The same numbers I'd been playing for 20 years. My birthday, our anniversary, the day our first grandchild was born. Numbers that meant something, once upon a time. When my phone rang that morning, I almost didn't answer. Unknown numbers usually meant bill collectors or telemarketers trying to sell me insurance I couldn't afford. But something made me pick up. A woman's voice, professional and excited, telling me I needed to sit down. She said I had won $50 million. $50 million. The words didn't make sense at first. I made her repeat it 3 times. I stumbled to the living room where my husband Robert was watching his morning news program, the same one he'd watched for 30 years. His gray hair was uncombed, and he was still in his old undershirt with the yellowed collar. I felt my heart pounding as I ran toward him, the lottery ticket clutched in my sweaty palm. "Robert! Robert!" I screamed, my voice cracking with emotion. "We're rich. We're rich. I won the lottery. $50 million. I was jumping up and down like a child, tears streaming down my face. For a moment, just a moment, I felt pure joy. I imagined us leaving this apartment, buying a house with a garden, traveling to places we'd only seen in magazines. Maybe finally visiting my sister in California. But Robert barely looked at me. He just grunted and turned back to the television. That's when I heard the phone ring in the bedroom. That's when everything changed forever. I was still clutching the ticket, still trembling with excitement, when I heard him answer. His voice was different on the phone. Softer. Warmer than it had been to me in years. I moved closer to the bedroom door, my bare feet silent on the carpet. "Yeah, Claire, she's going crazy out there," he was saying. His voice was almost amused, like I was some kind of joke. "Can you believe it? After all these years of playing those stupid numbers." There was a pause, and then I heard the words that shattered my world: "Don't tell her you're my secretary." I felt the blood drain from my face. My legs went weak, and I had to grab the doorframe to keep from falling. Secretary? What secretary? I was his secretary. I had worked in his small accounting office for 23 years, filing papers, answering phones, organizing his schedule. I was his wife and his secretary. But who was Claire? The excitement, the joy, the hope, it all drained out of me like water from a broken cup. I stood there in the hallway, holding a ticket worth $50 million, feeling poorer than I ever had in my life. The apartment seemed to shrink around me, the walls closing in. The radiator's clanking sounded like laughter now, mocking me. I walked back to the living room on unsteady legs. Robert had hung up the phone and was back to watching his program as if nothing had happened. As if my world hadn't just collapsed. I sat down in my worn armchair, the one with the loose springs that jabbed into my back, and stared at him. Really looked at him. When had his eyes become so cold? When had his voice lost all warmth for me? Let me tell you how I got here. How a woman who once believed in fairy tales ended up holding a winning lottery ticket while her heart broke into a million pieces. For nearly 4 decades, I had been the backbone of our family. When Robert started his accounting practice in 1985, I was the one who worked days at the elementary school and evenings in his office, typing letters on that old IBM typewriter that made my fingers ache. I was the one who went without new clothes so we could buy better office furniture. I was the one who ate peanut butter sandwiches for lunch while he took clients to expensive restaurants. "You're investing in our future," he used to say back then, his hand warm on my shoulder. "This sacrifice will pay off, Linda. You'll see." And I believed him. God help me, I believed him for years. I remember the night our son Michael was born. I had worked a double shift at the school, covering for a sick teacher, then rushed to the hospital barely making it in time for the delivery. Robert was supposed to be there, but he was at a client meeting that couldn't be rescheduled. I held our baby alone while he closed a deal that might bring in a few $100s. Even then, I told myself it was for our family's good. When our daughter Jessica came along 2 years later, I was doing the bookkeeping for 3 small businesses on the side while teaching full-time. My mother-in-law would watch Michael while I juggled spreadsheets and lesson plans late into the night. "Linda's amazing," Robert would tell people at church. "She can do anything." But he never said it to me. Never told me I was amazing when we were alone. The years blurred together in a haze of endless work and quiet exhaustion. I taught 5th graders during the day, their bright faces and eager questions the only joy in my routine. Then I'd rush to Robert's office, where I'd answer his phones and organize his files until 8 or 9 at night. Weekends were spent cleaning the house, doing laundry, grocery shopping, cooking meals that Robert would eat while reading the paper, barely acknowledging my presence. "You need to stop worrying so much about money, Linda," he'd say whenever I questioned why our bank account stayed empty despite all my working. "I handle the finances. That's not your concern." But I was concerned. I was concerned when the electricity got shut off. I was concerned when we couldn't afford groceries. I was concerned when my shoes had holes and his were always new. I found ways to make extra money. I babysit the neighbors' children, charging $5 an hour when other sitters charged 10. I tutored struggling students after school for whatever their parents could afford. I sold my grandmother's jewelry piece by piece, telling myself it was temporary, that things would get better once Robert's business took off. And slowly, quietly, something inside me began to die. I remember the Christmas when Jessica was 12 and Michael was 14. They had made lists, as children do, full of hopes and dreams written in careful cursive. Jessica wanted a bicycle, a pink one with ribbons on the handlebars like her friends. Michael wanted a baseball glove, a real leather one he'd seen at the sporting goods store. I had been saving for months, hiding $20 bills in an old coffee can behind the flour. But when I went to get the money 2 days before Christmas, the can was empty. Robert had found it and spent it all on a new computer for his office. "It's a business expense," he explained, not meeting my eyes. "We'll make it up to the kids next year." I worked extra shifts that December, cleaning offices at night after teaching all day. My back ached constantly, and I was so tired I could barely stand. But on Christmas morning, Jessica got her bicycle and Michael got his glove. Robert took credit for it all, basking in their grateful hugs while I watched from the kitchen, washing dishes with hands that shook from exhaustion. "You're the best dad ever," Jessica had squealed, wrapping her arms around his neck. And Robert smiled, the same charming smile that had won me over 30 years earlier. He never mentioned the nights I spent mopping floors to pay for those gifts. The pattern continued for decades. I worked, I saved, I sacrificed, and Robert took credit. When the kids needed college money, I took a second job at a grocery store, stocking shelves from midnight to 6 in the morning, then teaching children all day. When we needed a new roof, I sold my mother's pearl necklace, the only thing of value she'd left me. When Robert's business struggled, I gave him my entire savings account, money I'd been putting aside for 20 years hoping to someday visit Europe. "You're so generous, honey," he'd say, kissing my cheek with lips that felt cold. "I don't know what I'd do without you." But I was starting to know what I'd do without him, and that scared me more than I wanted to admit. The grandchildren came, and with them, new demands. Jessica had 2 boys, Ryan and Tyler, and she expected me to babysit whenever she needed a break. "You're retired now, Mom," she'd say, dropping them off without asking if I had plans. "You love spending time with them." And I did love them, desperately. But love and exhaustion can exist in the same heart, wearing you down until you feel hollow inside. Michael's daughter Sarah was different. Even as a little girl, she seemed to see things others missed. She'd bring me drawings she'd made at school, pictures of grandmothers with sad eyes and drooping shoulders. "This is you, Grandma," she'd say, placing her small hand on my arm. "But I made your smile bigger because that's how you should look." But my smiles were getting smaller each year. Each birthday that passed unnoticed. Each illness I endured alone while Robert was too busy to take me to the doctor. Each night I fell asleep to the sound of him on the phone with clients, his voice animated and warm in ways it never was for me anymore. The worst was my 60th birthday. I had hoped, foolishly, that maybe he would remember. Maybe plan something small, dinner at that Italian place we used to go to when we were young and still held hands in restaurants. I waited all day, checking the mail for a card, watching the door for flowers that never came. That evening, I finally asked him about it. "Your birthday?" He looked genuinely confused. "Wasn't that last month?" "It's today, Robert. Today is my 60th birthday." He shrugged, turning back to his newspaper. "Well, happy birthday then. Maybe we can do something next weekend if I'm not too busy." I went to bed that night feeling more alone than I ever had in my life. But even then, even drowning in loneliness, I told myself it was normal. Marriage was work. Love required sacrifice. These were the lies I told myself because the truth was too terrifying to face. The truth was that I had become invisible in my own life. It started with small things. Forgotten birthdays, as I mentioned. Missed anniversaries. When I got pneumonia at 62, I spent 3 days in bed with a fever while Robert complained about having to make his own coffee. "Can't you just take some aspirin?" he asked, annoyed that I couldn't get up to cook dinner. "Mrs. Patterson next door seems fine, and she's older than you." Doctor visits became battles. When my diabetes worsened, requiring regular checkups and medication, Robert acted like I was malingering. "All these doctor bills," he'd mutter, forgetting that I still worked part-time at the school district just to keep our insurance active. "Maybe if you exercised more and complained less, you wouldn't need so many pills." I began to notice other things too. How he perked up when the phone rang, but only certain calls. How he'd step outside to answer, claiming it was work stuff that I wouldn't understand. How he'd started dressing better, buying new shirts and cologne, saying he needed to present a professional image to clients. One evening, while folding his laundry, I found a receipt in his shirt pocket. Dinner for 2 at an expensive restaurant in Midtown, the kind of place he claimed we couldn't afford for our anniversary. The date was the previous Thursday, when he told me he was working late. The receipt showed 2 entrees, 2 glasses of wine, dessert. A romantic dinner that hadn't been with me. My hands shook as I held that piece of paper. All those years of peanut butter sandwiches, of wearing the same coat for 8 winters, of saying no to every small luxury while he spent our money on someone else. I sat on the edge of our bed, that receipt burning in my palm, and felt something crack inside my chest. But still, I said nothing. I folded the receipt carefully and put it in my jewelry box, next to the empty spaces where my mother's pearls and grandmother's rings used to be. Evidence of a betrayal I wasn't yet ready to confront. The pattern escalated. Robert would disappear for hours at a time, offering vague explanations about client meetings and business dinners. He started staying out later, coming home after I was already in bed, smelling like perfume that wasn't mine. When I asked questions, he'd get angry. "You're becoming paranoid, Linda," he'd snap. "I work hard to support this family, and instead of being grateful, you interrogate me like I'm some kind of criminal. Maybe if you had more interesting things to do with your time, you wouldn't be obsessing over mine." So I tried to have more interesting things to do. I joined a book club at the library, but had to quit when Robert complained that my Tuesday evenings out interfered with his schedule. I signed up for a ceramics class, but stopped going when he made faces at the small bowls and vases I brought home, calling them waste of money crafts. Slowly, I retreated into a smaller and smaller world. The apartment. The part-time job. The grocery store. The grandchildren when they needed me. A life measured in loads of laundry and meals cooked for a man who barely looked at me while he ate them. And then came the night that changed everything. It was a cold February evening, about 3 weeks before I bought that lottery ticket. Robert had said he was working late again, the 3rd time that week. I was cleaning his desk, something I'd started doing regularly since his papers were always scattered everywhere, when I found something that made my blood freeze. Hidden under a stack of tax forms was a leather-bound ledger I'd never seen before. My hands trembled as I opened it. Page after page of entries, dating back 3 years. Payments to C. Morrison listed as consulting fees. Hundreds of dollars a month, sometimes more. Amounts that would have paid for the medicine I'd been rationing. Money that could have fixed our leaking roof or replaced our broken stove. But the most damning entries were the most recent ones. C. Morrison, weekend trip expenses. C. Morrison, dinner and theater. C. Morrison, jewelry for services. Each entry was in Robert's careful handwriting, each one a dagger in my heart. Claire Morrison. The secretary he'd mentioned on the phone. The woman I was apparently not supposed to know about. I sat in his desk chair, probably the first time I'd ever sat there in all our years together, and felt 38 years of marriage crumble around me. The room spun slightly, and I gripped the edge of the desk to steady myself. All those years of asking for grocery money, of wearing clothes until they fell apart, of working multiple jobs to keep us afloat while he was spending our money on another woman. I thought about every birthday present I'd never received, every anniversary that passed unnoticed, every time I'd been told we couldn't afford something I needed while he was buying jewelry for his secretary. The betrayal was so complete, so thorough, that I felt physically ill. That's when I heard his key in the lock. I closed the ledger quickly and put it back where I'd found it, my heart hammering in my chest. Robert came in humming, actually humming, looking lighter and happier than I'd seen him in years. His hair was disheveled, and there was lipstick on his collar, bright red and obvious. "Hi, honey," he said absently, not even looking at me as he headed for the shower. "Working late again. These clients are really demanding." I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw that ledger at his head. I wanted to demand answers, to fight for the respect I'd never received. Instead, I went to the kitchen and made him a sandwich, same as always. My hands moved automatically while my mind reeled with the discovery. As I stood at the counter spreading mayonnaise on bread, I caught sight of myself in the toaster's reflection. When had I become this woman? This gray-haired ghost moving through her own life like a servant in someone else's house? When had I stopped being Linda and become just the woman who did things for Robert? I made a cup of tea with shaking hands and sat at our small kitchen table, the same one we'd bought when we were newlyweds and thought we'd be happy forever. The ceramic mug was chipped, another thing we couldn't afford to replace, and I held it carefully to keep the hot tea from spilling through the crack. For the first time in decades, I let myself think the unthinkable. What if I said no? What if I stopped working extra jobs to cover his expenses? What if I stopped doing his laundry and cooking his meals? What if I stopped pretending not to notice the calls he took in private and the money that disappeared from our accounts? What if I stopped being grateful for a man who treated me worse than he treated strangers? The thought was terrifying and liberating at the same time. I was 68 years old. Did I have the courage to start over? Did I have the strength to demand better? Or was it too late for someone like me? That night, I lay awake listening to Robert snore, the same snore that had kept me awake for 38 years. I stared at the ceiling and made a decision. I would buy a lottery ticket. Just one. With numbers that meant something to me, not to us. And maybe, just maybe, something would change. 3 weeks later, that lottery ticket made me a millionaire. But it was Robert's phone call that made me realize I'd been poor all along. After I heard him talking to Claire, calling her his secretary, telling her not to let me know she existed, I couldn't move for several minutes. I just stood there in the hallway, that winning ticket in my hand, feeling like the biggest fool in New York City. $50 million, and I felt broker than ever. When Robert finally came out of the bedroom, I was sitting in the living room holding the ticket. He glanced at me and rolled his eyes. "You're not still going on about that lottery thing, are you?" he asked, his voice irritated. "Linda, the chances of actually winning are, I did win," I said quietly. "The lottery commission called. $50 million. He stopped mid-sentence and stared at me. Really looked at me for the first time in months. I saw his expression change as the reality sank in. $50 million. More money than his little accounting practice would make in several lifetimes. More money than he'd ever spent on his secretary. "You're serious," he said slowly. "You actually won." I nodded, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "I did. But I heard your phone call, Robert. I heard you tell Claire not to let me know she's your secretary." His face went red, then pale. He opened his mouth, then closed it, looking like a fish gasping for air. For once in our marriage, Robert was speechless. "How long?" I asked. "How long have you been cheating on me? Linda, it's not what you think. How long have you been spending our money on another woman while I ate peanut butter sandwiches and wore the same coat for 8 years? You don't understand the situation. I found your ledger, Robert. I've seen the payments to Claire Morrison. Consulting fees? Really? Is that what we're calling it now?" He sat down heavily on the couch, looking older than I'd ever seen him. But I felt no pity. After 38 years of being told I didn't understand things, I finally understood everything perfectly. "It wasn't supposed to happen," he said weakly. "It just developed over time." "How long?" I repeated. 3 years, he whispered. 3 years. While I worked part-time jobs to buy our grandchildren Christmas presents, he was buying jewelry for his girlfriend. While I rationed my diabetes medication to save money, he was taking her to expensive restaurants. While I wore holes in my shoes, he was spending hundreds of dollars a month on consulting fees. The room fell silent except for the radiator's familiar clank. I looked around our small apartment with new eyes. The peeling wallpaper I'd learned to ignore. The furniture we'd never replaced because we couldn't afford it. The empty picture frames where family photos used to be before I'd quietly removed them, tired of looking at lies. "What do you want to do?" Robert asked finally, his voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. For the first time in our marriage, he was asking me what I wanted. Not telling me what I should want, not explaining why my wants were impractical or selfish, but actually asking. And I realized I had no idea how to answer because I'd spent so many years not being allowed to want anything. "I need time to think," I said, standing up carefully. My knees ached, and I felt every one of my 68 years. "I'm going to visit Sarah for a few days." "Sarah?" "Linda, we need to talk about this. About the money. About what this means for our future." Our future. After 38 years of sacrificing my present for our future, after decades of being told to wait for things to get better, the man who'd been cheating on me for 3 years wanted to talk about our future. "No," I said, and the word felt foreign in my mouth. "We don't need to talk about anything right now. I need space to think, and you need to decide if you're going to keep lying to me." I walked to our bedroom and packed a small bag, the same canvas overnight bag I'd had since the kids were little. Robert followed me, trying to explain, trying to minimize, trying to regain control of the narrative. But I wasn't listening anymore. For the first time in decades, I was listening to myself. Sarah lived in Brooklyn with her boyfriend in a small apartment near Prospect Park. She'd been the only one in the family who'd ever asked me how I was doing and waited for a real answer. When I called her from a payphone 3 blocks from our apartment, she didn't ask questions, just said, "Come over, Grandma. I'll make us some tea." The subway ride felt like an escape. I sat in the rattling car surrounded by strangers and felt freer than I had in years. Nobody on that train expected me to cook them dinner or wash their clothes or subsidize their lifestyle. I was just another woman with a bag, going somewhere that might be better than where she'd been. Sarah's building was a 4th-floor walk-up in a neighborhood that was trying to decide if it was still gritty or if it had become trendy. Her hallway smelled like curry and paint fumes, nothing like the stale coffee scent of my own building. When she opened the door, looking so much like I had at 20, my carefully maintained composure finally cracked. "Grandma," she said, wrapping her arms around me. "What happened?" And for the first time in 3 years, someone was asking me what happened instead of telling me what I was supposed to think about what happened. The tears came then, all the tears I'd held back during those long, lonely nights. Sarah led me to her tiny couch and held my hands while I told her everything. The lottery ticket. The overheard phone call. The ledger. The 3 years of betrayal. "He's been cheating on you for 3 years?" Sarah's eyes filled with anger. "Grandma, how could you not know?" "I knew something was wrong," I admitted. But I didn't want to believe it. And every time I asked questions, he made me feel like I was being paranoid or unreasonable. After a while, you start to doubt your own instincts. Sarah made us tea in mismatched cups, the kind of imperfect kitchen accessories I'd always wanted but Robert considered wasteful. We sat in her bright little apartment with plants on every windowsill, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: acceptance without judgment. "What are you going to do about the lottery money?" Sarah asked. "I don't know. It doesn't feel real yet. This morning I was worried about whether we could afford groceries this week, and now I'm dealing with $50 million and a cheating husband. It's too much to process." "Maybe that's the point," Sarah said thoughtfully. "Maybe you're not supposed to process it all at once. Maybe you're supposed to take it one decision at a time." That night, I slept on Sarah's couch under a quilt her other grandmother had made. The sounds of Brooklyn filtered through her windows: sirens, car alarms, people talking on the street below. But instead of keeping me awake, they felt like a lullaby. I was somewhere nobody expected anything from me, and for the first time in months, I slept through the night. The next morning, Sarah made pancakes. Real pancakes, from scratch, not the mix from a box that I'd been buying for years to save money. They were golden and fluffy, and she served them with real maple syrup that probably cost more than I usually spent on groceries in a week. "You know what I think, Grandma," she said, pouring coffee into a mug that said, "World's Okayest Granddaughter," a gift I'd given her years ago. "I think you've been so busy taking care of everyone else that you forgot how to take care of yourself." She was right, of course. When was the last time I'd done something purely for my own enjoyment? When was the last time I'd bought something I wanted instead of something someone else needed? When was the last time I'd made a decision based on what would make me happy instead of what would keep peace in the house? "I don't even know what I like anymore," I confessed. "I've been Linda the wife and Linda the mother and Linda the grandmother for so long, I'm not sure who just Linda is." "Then maybe it's time to find out," Sarah suggested. "You've got 50 million reasons to figure out who you want to be." That afternoon, we walked through Prospect Park. It was a sunny day in March, one of those days when winter finally loosens its grip and you can imagine spring might actually come. Children were playing on the playgrounds, their laughter carrying on the wind. Couples walked hand in hand, looking like Robert and I had once looked, before everything soured into routine and resentment. "Tell me about when you were young," Sarah said as we sat on a bench near the lake. "Before you were married. What did you want to be?" It took me a long time to answer because I had to reach so far back into my memory. Before Robert, before children, before decades of putting everyone else's dreams ahead of my own. What had 20-year-old Linda wanted from life? "I wanted to travel," I said slowly. "I wanted to see Europe. I had saved up money from my job at the drugstore, and I was planning to go to Paris and London and Rome. I had guidebooks and everything. What happened to that plan? I met your grandfather. He said traveling was expensive and impractical. He said we should save our money for more important things, like a house and children. So I gave him the money I'd been saving, and we used it for our wedding and honeymoon in the Poconos." Sarah was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, "Grandma, you could go to Paris now. You could go everywhere you wanted to go back then." The idea was so foreign to me that I almost laughed. Women like me didn't suddenly decide to go to Paris. We stayed home and did our duties and were grateful for what we had. But then I remembered the morning's revelation: I had $50 million. I could do whatever I wanted. "I wouldn't even know where to start," I said. "The internet," Sarah said simply. "We could look up flights and hotels right now. We could have you on a plane to Paris next week if you wanted." "Next week?" The timeline was impossible to imagine. This time next week, I could be walking along the Seine instead of shuffling around my cramped apartment. I could be eating croissants in a cafe instead of making peanut butter sandwiches. I could be Linda the Traveler instead of Linda the Doormat. But the thought also terrified me. What if I didn't know how to be happy? What if I'd been miserable for so long that contentment felt foreign? What if I was too old to start over? I'm scared, I admitted to Sarah. What if I make the wrong choice? What if you make the right one, she countered. Grandma, what's the worst thing that could happen? You spend some money on yourself for once? You do something that makes you happy instead of something that makes everyone else comfortable? Those don't sound like terrible mistakes to me. We spent the rest of the afternoon making lists. Places I wanted to see. Things I wanted to try. Books I wanted to read without feeling guilty for taking time away from housework. Small dreams I'd buried so deep I'd forgotten they existed. That evening, Sarah's boyfriend Mark came home from work. He was a kind young man who treated Sarah the way I remembered Robert treating me in the very beginning, before love became obligation and partnership became servitude. Watching them together was both heartbreaking and hopeful. Heartbreaking to see what I'd lost, hopeful to see that it was possible for two people to be happy together. Mark, my grandmother won the lottery, Sarah announced over dinner. $50 million. Mark nearly choked on his pasta. Seriously? That's amazing. Congratulations, Mrs. Williams. What are you going to do with the money? Nobody had asked me that question yet. Robert had talked about what the money meant for our future, but nobody had asked what I wanted to do with it. Because it was my ticket, bought with my $5, chosen with my numbers. My win. I'm not sure yet, I said. I'm still figuring things out. Well, whatever you decide, I hope you do something awesome for yourself, Mark said. Sarah's told me how much you've done for your family over the years. You deserve to have some fun. After dinner, I called Robert from Sarah's phone. I hadn't spoken to him since I'd left 2 days earlier, and I wasn't sure what to expect. Linda? Where are you? People have been calling about the lottery, and I don't know what to tell them. People had been calling. Of course. $50 million doesn't stay secret for long, especially in a neighborhood where everyone knows everyone else's business. I'm at Sarah's. I needed some space to think. Well, you've had space. It's time to come home so we can discuss what we're going to do with the money. I've been thinking about investments, maybe some stock market opportunities. There's a lot of potential here if we're smart about it. Our money. He was already taking ownership of something that belonged to me, making plans for funds he'd had no part in earning. The same man who had hidden his affair for 3 years was now expecting me to share my lottery winnings with him as if nothing had changed. Robert, I'm not ready to come home yet. And I'm not ready to make any decisions about the money. Linda, be reasonable. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. We can't just sit on $50 million. We need to make plans. We need to make plans about a lot of things, I said. Including your relationship with Claire Morrison. The silence stretched so long I thought he might have hung up. Finally, he spoke, his voice defensive and angry. I told you, that's not what you think it is. Claire is just my secretary. If you're going to blow this whole thing out of proportion, Robert, I interrupted, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. I'm 68 years old. I've been married to you for 38 years. I've worked multiple jobs to support this family while you spent our money on another woman. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending I don't know what I know. Another long silence. Then, what do you want from me, Linda? I want the truth. I want to know why you decided I wasn't worth being faithful to. I want to know why you thought it was okay to spend money on her while I wore shoes with holes in them. I want to understand how the man who promised to love and cherish me could treat me like I was invisible. You're being dramatic, I'm being honest. For the first time in years, I'm being completely honest about how this marriage has made me feel. Sarah had been listening from the kitchen, and when I hung up the phone, she came and sat beside me on the couch. How do you feel? She asked. Scared, I said. And angry. And sad. But also relieved? Like maybe I don't have to pretend anymore that everything is fine when it's not. You don't, Sarah confirmed. You never did. You just thought you had to because nobody ever told you that you deserved better. That night, lying on Sarah's couch again, I thought about the conversation with Robert. How quickly he'd moved from defending his affair to talking about investment opportunities. How he called me dramatic for asking for honesty. How even now, even with 50 million reasons for him to treat me better, he still couldn't see me as anything more than an inconvenience. But Sarah saw me. This remarkable young woman who was barely starting her own adult life had more respect for me than the man I'd been married to for nearly 4 decades. She asked about my dreams, listened to my fears, validated my feelings, treated me like I mattered. If Sarah could see value in me, maybe there was value to see. The next morning, I made a decision. I was going to stay in Brooklyn for another few days, and I was going to start figuring out who Linda was when nobody needed anything from her. Sarah had to work during the day, so I would explore the neighborhood, maybe visit the botanical garden or the art museum. For the first time in years, I had no obligations, no schedule, no one expecting me to be anywhere or do anything. The freedom was intoxicating and terrifying. I started with small things. I bought coffee at a cafe instead of making it at home. I sat in the park and fed pigeons without worrying that someone would think I was wasting time. I went to the library and checked out books I wanted to read, not books someone else had recommended or books that would help me be more useful to my family. One afternoon, I found myself in the Brooklyn Museum, standing in front of a painting by Georgia O'Keeffe. The colors were bold and confident, nothing like the muted, practical life I'd been living. The painting seemed to pulse with energy and self-assurance, and I found myself crying in front of it. "Are you all right?" A security guard approached me with concern. "I'm fine," I said, wiping my eyes. "It's just beautiful." "It is," he agreed. O'Keeffe was something else. Lived life on her own terms, you know? Way ahead of her time. Her own terms. When was the last time I'd done anything on my own terms? When was the last time I'd made a choice based purely on what I wanted instead of what was expected, needed, or practical? That evening, I called Robert again. This time, I had a different kind of conversation in mind. "I want you to move out," I said without preamble. "What? Linda, that's ridiculous. You can't just." "I can, actually. I've been thinking about this for 3 days, and I've made my decision. I want you to move out of our apartment while I decide what I want to do about our marriage." "You can't make me leave. It's my apartment too." "Actually, it's not. I looked up the lease today. It's been in my name for 15 years because your credit was too poor to qualify. I can absolutely ask you to leave." Another long silence. I could practically hear him trying to figure out how to regain control of the situation. "Linda, you're upset. I understand that. But we can work this out. We don't need to do anything drastic." "What's drastic is spending 3 years lying to me while you had an affair," I said. "What's drastic is treating me like a servant while you lived like a bachelor. Asking you to move out is just practical. Where am I supposed to go?" "You could stay with Claire," I suggested. "Since you've been spending so much time with her anyway." The conversation ended with him hanging up on me, something he'd never done before. But instead of feeling hurt, I felt empowered. For the first time in our marriage, I'd set a boundary and stuck to it, even when he tried to manipulate me out of it. Sarah was proud of me. So proud that she insisted we celebrate with dinner at a nice restaurant, the kind of place I'd always thought was too expensive for people like me. But I wasn't people like me anymore. I was a woman with $50 million who was learning to believe she deserved good things. The restaurant was in downtown Brooklyn, with exposed brick walls and candles on every table. The menu was full of foods I'd never tried, prepared in ways I'd never heard of. Sarah encouraged me to order whatever looked interesting, not whatever was cheapest. It was a revolutionary concept. "To new beginnings," Sarah raised her glass of wine. "To new beginnings," I echoed, clinking my glass against hers. The wine was better than any I'd ever tasted. The food was incredible. And for the first time I could remember, I ate a meal without worrying about how much it cost or whether I deserved it. I was just a woman having dinner with someone who loved her, enjoying food that made her happy. "Tell me more about your travel dreams," Sarah said as we shared a chocolate dessert that was almost too beautiful to eat. "I don't know if those dreams are still valid," I said. "I'm not 20 anymore. Traveling alone at my age might be." "Might be what? Amazing? Adventurous? Exactly what you need?" I laughed, surprising myself. When was the last time I'd laughed at dinner? "You sound like a travel brochure." "Maybe I should write travel brochures for grandmother," Sarah grinned. "See the world without anyone telling you you're too old or it's too expensive or you should be practical instead." That night, Sarah helped me research European tours designed for mature travelers. We found river cruises through France, walking tours of English gardens, art appreciation trips to Italy. 2 days ago, these would have seemed impossible. Tonight, they seemed inevitable. "I think I want to go to Ireland," I said, looking at pictures of green hills and ancient castles. "My great-grandmother came from County Cork. I've always wondered what it looked like where she grew up." "Then go," Sarah said simply. "Book a trip to Ireland. Tomorrow, if you want." "It feels selfish," I admitted. "Good," Sarah replied. "You've spent 68 years being unselfish. Maybe it's time to try the opposite for a while." The next day, I went back to Manhattan. Not to my apartment, but to a hotel in Midtown. I wasn't ready to see Robert face to face, but I had business to take care of. The lottery office was my first stop, where I signed paperwork and met with financial advisors who spoke in terms I was still learning to understand. Millions of dollars. Investment portfolios. Trust funds. Words that had never applied to my life before. "What are your goals for this money?" one advisor asked. "My goals? Not our goals, not the family's goals, but my goals." I realized I'd never been asked that question about anything, let alone something this important. I want to travel, I said. And I want to make sure I'm never dependent on anyone else again. Those are excellent goals, she replied, as if wanting to travel and wanting independence were perfectly reasonable desires for a 68-year-old woman. We can definitely help you achieve both of those. I left that meeting with accounts in my name only, investments that would generate income for the rest of my life, and the knowledge that I would never again have to choose between my medication and groceries. The relief was overwhelming. My next stop was a lawyer's office. I needed to understand my options regarding the apartment, my marriage, and my rights. The lawyer, a kind woman about Sarah's age, listened to my story without judgment and explained my legal position clearly. You have several options, she said. But first, let me ask you something. What do you want the outcome to be? I want respect, I said. I want honesty. I want to feel like I matter to the people who claim to love me. Those are reasonable things to want, she said. The question is whether you can get them from your husband, or if you need to get them somewhere else. I spent the afternoon walking through Central Park, thinking about that question. Could Robert change? Could 38 years of taking me for granted be undone by lottery winnings and ultimatums? Did I want them to be? The answer surprised me. I wasn't sure I wanted him to change anymore. I wasn't sure I wanted to go back to being married to him, even if he became the perfect husband overnight. Somewhere in the last few days, I'd started to imagine a different life entirely. A life where I wasn't constantly trying to earn love from someone who didn't know how to give it. That evening, I called Jessica, our daughter. She'd been leaving increasingly frantic messages on my phone since news of the lottery win had spread. When she answered, her voice was sharp with anxiety. Mom, where are you? Dad says you left him and you're acting crazy about some secretary. What's going on? I'm not acting crazy, I said calmly. I'm acting like a woman who found out her husband has been having an affair for 3 years. Long pause. What? Dad's having an affair? You didn't know? Of course I didn't know. Mom, are you sure? Maybe you misunderstood something? I explained what I'd found, what I'd heard, what I'd discovered. As I talked, Jessica's responses changed from disbelief to anger to something that sounded almost like relief. I knew something was wrong, she said finally. The last few times we were all together, you looked so sad. I asked Dad about it, and he said you were just getting older, that you'd always been moody. I should have pressed harder. It's not your fault, I assured her. I should have spoken up sooner. What are you going to do? I don't know yet. I'm figuring it out day by day. And the lottery money? What about it? Well, it's marital property, right? Dad has a claim to half of it. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Even Jessica, my own daughter, was more concerned about the money than about my emotional well-being. Even she saw my lottery win as something Robert deserved a share of, despite his betrayal. We'll see, I said carefully. I'm talking to lawyers about all of that. Mom, I hope you're not going to do anything rash. I mean, Dad made a mistake, but $50 million is a lot of money to make decisions about when you're emotional. Emotional. There was that word again, used to dismiss and minimize my legitimate feelings. I was emotional about finding out my husband was cheating on me. How strange. After I hung up, I realized that Jessica's reaction was probably a preview of what I could expect from the rest of the family. They would minimize Robert's betrayal and focus on the money. They would frame my desire for respect and honesty as emotional and rash. They would try to guilt me into sharing my winnings with the man who'd spent 3 years lying to me about where our money was going. But for the first time in my life, I didn't care what they expected from me. I spent 2 more days in Manhattan, meeting with financial advisors and lawyers, opening accounts and signing papers that gave me control over my own financial future. It was paperwork that should have been routine, but it felt revolutionary. Every signature was a declaration of independence. On Thursday morning, I took a taxi back to the Lower East Side. I needed to collect some of my things and have a face-to-face conversation with Robert. Sarah offered to come with me for moral support, but this was something I needed to do alone. The building looked smaller than I remembered, though I'd only been gone a week. The hallway smelled the same, coffee and cooking odors and the faint mustiness of old buildings in a city that never fully dried out. I climbed the 3 flights of stairs slowly, my knees protesting, and stood outside our apartment door for several minutes before using my key. Robert was in the living room, watching television in his undershirt, just like always. But something was different. The apartment was messier than usual, with takeout containers on the coffee table and newspapers scattered everywhere. It looked like he'd been living like a bachelor, which I supposed he had been, in his mind, for 3 years. Linda, he said when he saw me. He muted the television but didn't get up. I was wondering when you'd come back. I'm not back, I said, standing in the doorway. I came to get some things and to talk. About time. We need to discuss what we're going to do with the money. I've been thinking about it, and I have some ideas. Of course he did. A week ago, he'd been telling me we couldn't afford new shower curtains, and now he had ideas about how to spend $50 million. Robert, I'm not interested in discussing money right now. I want to discuss our marriage. He sighed, the sound I'd heard thousands of times when I brought up topics he didn't want to address. Linda, I've told you, the thing with Claire isn't what you think. You're making it into something bigger than it is. Then explain to me what it is, I said, moving into the room but remaining standing. Explain to me why you've been spending hundreds of dollars a month on her for 3 years. Explain to me why you told her not to let me know she worked for you. She doesn't work for me exactly. She's more of a business consultant. A business consultant you take to dinner and buy jewelry for. Robert's face flushed red. You've been spying on me. I've been trying to understand why we never seemed to have money for anything I needed while you were spending freely on someone else. That's not spying, Robert. That's basic arithmetic. We stared at each other across our small living room, and I saw him clearly for the first time in years. The man I'd married had been charming and optimistic, full of plans and dreams he'd invited me to share. This man was tired and defensive and angry at being caught in lies he never thought I'd discover. What do you want from me? He asked finally. I want you to tell me the truth about your relationship with Claire. I want to know if you've been having an affair. Define affair. Those 2 words told me everything I needed to know. A faithful husband doesn't ask his wife to define affair when she asks if he's been unfaithful. A faithful husband doesn't need to negotiate the terms of the question. Robert, just answer me honestly. Are you in love with someone else? He was quiet for a long time, staring at the muted television screen. Finally, he spoke without looking at me. Things between us haven't been good for a long time, Linda. We've been more like roommates than husband and wife. Claire and I. We have things in common. She understands my work, my goals. She doesn't question every decision I make or complain about money all the time. There it was. The truth, finally. Not just that he'd been unfaithful, but that he blamed me for his unfaithfulness. I questioned his decisions because his decisions had been bankrupting us while he spent money on another woman. I complained about money because there never seemed to be any for the things our family needed. So yes, I said. You're having an affair. It's complicated. No, it's not complicated. You made a choice to be unfaithful to your wife, to lie to me for 3 years, and to spend our money on another woman while I went without things I needed. That's not complicated. That's betrayal. Robert finally looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before, contempt. Not anger, not frustration, but actual contempt. You want to know the truth, Linda? Fine. Yes, I care about Claire. Yes, we've been together. And yes, it's been the happiest I've felt in years. She doesn't nag me or make me feel guilty for wanting nice things. She doesn't act like every dollar I spend is a personal attack on her. Every word was carefully chosen to hurt me as much as possible. But instead of crumbling, instead of apologizing and begging him to choose me, I felt something unexpected, relief. Thank you, I said. Thank you? For finally being honest. For finally admitting that you've been lying to me and stealing from me and cheating on me. It's the most honest you've been in years. I walked to our bedroom and began packing a suitcase. Not just enough for a few days this time, but enough for whatever came next. Robert followed me, his tone changing from defensive to panicked as he realized I wasn't going to cry or plead with him. Linda, wait. Let's think about this rationally. We've been married for almost 40 years. We have children together, grandchildren. We can work this out. We can work this out? I paused in my packing and looked at him. Robert, you just told me that being with another woman is the happiest you've felt in years. You've told me I'm a nag who doesn't understand you. Why would you want to work it out with someone you clearly don't respect or love? Because of the money, he said, and then immediately realized what he'd admitted. I mean, because of our family. Because of what we built together. What we built together? I laughed, and it sounded strange in our bedroom. When was the last time I'd laughed in this house? Robert, I built it. I worked multiple jobs to support your business. I raised our children mostly alone while you were building your career. I sacrificed my dreams, my health, my happiness to build the life you wanted. And you spent the last 3 years showing me how little you valued any of it. I zipped up my suitcase and turned to face him. You're right about one thing. We have been like roommates for a long time. But roommates treat each other with respect. Roommates don't lie to each other or steal from each other. The money changes things, he said desperately. We could travel, buy a house, do all the things you always wanted to do. We could start over. I am going to start over, I said. But not with you. I walked past him into the living room, where I picked up a framed photograph from our wedding day. We looked so young, so hopeful. I had believed we would grow old together happily. I had believed that love would be enough to carry us through anything. As Robert watched, I took the photograph out of the frame and tore it slowly in half. His face on one side, mine on the other. It was a dramatic gesture, maybe even a ridiculous one, but it felt necessary. Some endings need symbols. Linda, don't do this, Robert pleaded. Don't throw away 40 years of marriage over a mistake. 3 years isn't a mistake, Robert. It's a choice. Just like this is a choice. I dropped the torn photograph on the coffee table and picked up my suitcase. At the door, I turned back one more time. I'll be in touch through my lawyer about the divorce. You can stay in the apartment through the end of the lease, but after that, you'll need to find somewhere else to live. Divorce? His face went pale. Linda, you can't be serious. We can get counseling, we can. Goodbye, Robert. I closed the door behind me and walked down the 3 flights of stairs for the last time as a married woman. Each step felt lighter than the one before. Outside, I took a taxi to Sarah's apartment. She was waiting for me with a bottle of wine and a look of fierce pride on her face. How did it go? She asked. It's over, I said. Really over. I asked for a divorce. Sarah hugged me tight, and I realized I wasn't sad. I wasn't even particularly angry anymore. I was tired, yes, but it was the good kind of tired that comes after finishing a difficult job. The kind of tired that comes before rest, not the kind that comes from endless struggle. That night, we ordered Chinese food and made plans. I was going to buy a small apartment in Brooklyn, somewhere near Sarah but independent. I was going to book a trip to Ireland for the fall. I was going to take art classes and maybe learn to cook properly instead of just throwing together quick meals for people who barely thanked me for them. Are you scared? Sarah asked as we shared lo mein noodles and spring rolls. Terrified, I admitted. But also excited. For the first time in decades, I get to decide what my life looks like. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal meetings and real estate appointments. My lawyer was excellent, and she made sure I understood all my options. Since the lottery ticket had been purchased with my money and was in my name only, Robert had no legal claim to the winnings. New York's divorce laws would protect my lottery money as separate property, not marital property. The apartment hunt was more fun than I'd expected. Sarah came with me to look at places in Brooklyn Heights and Park Slope, neighborhoods I'd never been able to afford before, but that seemed possible now. I found a small one-bedroom with hardwood floors and a view of the Manhattan skyline from the living room window. It had a tiny kitchen that was still twice the size of the one I'd been cooking in for 15 years. This is it, I told the real estate agent. I want to make an offer. Are you sure? She asked. There are several other properties I could show you. I'm sure, I said, and meant it. The apartment felt like possibility, like a place where Linda who traveled to Ireland could live, quite different from Linda who made peanut butter sandwiches. While I was apartment hunting, Robert was apparently trying to mount a campaign to win me back. He called constantly, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails. He sent flowers to Sarah's apartment, the first flowers he'd given me in probably 10 years. He even showed up at Sarah's building one evening, begging to talk to me. He's been calling Mom too, Sarah told me. And Uncle Michael. He's telling everyone you've lost your mind, that you're making terrible decisions because you're emotional about the money. What does Michael say? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. He thinks you should give Dad another chance. He says marriages go through rough patches, and $50 million is too much to give up over hurt feelings. Hurt feelings. As if discovering a 3-year affair was just hurt feelings, like being upset about a forgotten birthday or a thoughtless comment. What about Jessica? She's torn. She's angry at Dad for cheating, but she's also worried about the family falling apart. She thinks you should separate for a while but not actually divorce. I wasn't surprised by their responses. My children had grown up watching me absorb disappointments and betrayals without complaint. They'd learned to see my pain as less important than family stability, just like I had taught them by example. Breaking that pattern would be hard for all of us. But I was done teaching that lesson. The final confrontation came a month after I'd left Robert. My lawyer had scheduled a mediation session to discuss the terms of our divorce. Robert arrived with his own lawyer and a thick folder of what he claimed were documents proving his contribution to our marriage entitled him to half the lottery winnings. Your client is making an emotional decision that she'll regret, his lawyer said to mine. Mr. Williams has been the primary breadwinner for this family for nearly 40 years. He has a legitimate claim to marital assets. The lottery ticket was purchased by my client with her own money and is registered solely in her name, my lawyer replied calmly. Under New York law, it's separate property. But even if it weren't, adultery affects asset distribution in divorce proceedings. The mediation lasted 4 hours. Robert alternated between apologizing and attacking, between promising to change and blaming me for driving him to infidelity. His lawyer presented elaborate arguments about his business contributions and future earning potential. He even brought photos of our children and grandchildren, claiming I was destroying their family legacy. But I sat quietly through it all, listening to a man I'd been married to for 38 years try to claim ownership of luck that had nothing to do with him. When it was my turn to speak, I had only one thing to say. I spent 40 years believing that love meant sacrifice. That being a good wife meant accepting less than I deserved so that everyone else could be comfortable. I gave you my youth, my health, my dreams, and my financial security. In return, you gave me betrayal and contempt. The lottery didn't make me rich. It made me free. And freedom isn't something I'm willing to share with you anymore. The divorce settlement was finalized 6 weeks later. Robert got a modest monthly alimony payment, enough to live comfortably but not lavishly. I got everything else, the lottery money, the apartment, and most importantly, my independence. On the day the divorce was final, Sarah took me out to celebrate at the same restaurant where we'd had dinner that first week when everything changed. We ordered the wine that had tasted like possibility and toasted to new beginnings. How does it feel? Sarah asked. Strange, I said honestly. I've never been alone before. I went from my parents' house to marriage, from wife to grandmother, never just me. And now? Now I get to find out who me is. The transformation didn't happen overnight. Some days I still woke up expecting to make breakfast for someone else, still reached for the phone to call and check if Robert needed anything. 40 years of habits are hard to break, even when you want to break them. But gradually, I began to discover the rhythms of a life that belonged only to me. I woke up when my body was ready to wake up, not when someone else needed coffee. I ate meals when I was hungry, not when meals were scheduled. I watched television programs I enjoyed instead of programs someone else had chosen. I signed up for watercolor classes at the Brooklyn Botanic Garden. My first paintings were terrible, muddy colors and shaky lines, but the teacher was encouraging. You're not trying to paint like someone else, she said. You're learning to paint like yourself. Learning to paint like myself became a metaphor for everything I was doing. Learning to live like myself. Learning to make decisions like myself. Learning to value my own opinion of my choices. The Ireland trip was scheduled for October. I'd booked a 2-week tour that would take me from Dublin to the Ring of Kerry, with stops in small villages where I might find traces of my great-grandmother's family. I bought new clothes for the trip, colors brighter than anything I'd worn in years. Blue like the ocean, green like the Irish hills I'd soon see, gold like the September light in my new apartment. 2 weeks before I was scheduled to leave, I got an unexpected phone call. Jessica was crying. Mom, I owe you an apology, she said through her tears. I ran into Claire Morrison at the grocery store today. My heart clenched. Claire Morrison, the woman I'd never met but who had shaped the last 3 years of my marriage. She recognized me somehow and came over to introduce herself. She said she was glad the family finally knew about her relationship with Dad because sneaking around had been hard on both of them. My daughter was quiet for a long moment. Mom, she said they'd been together for 4 years, not 3. She said Dad told her you two had been separated for years, that you were just living together for financial reasons until he could afford to leave. For years. An even longer betrayal than I'd known about. And lies about me, lies that made me complicit in my own humiliation. She seemed to think I knew all about their relationship, Jessica continued. She was talking about how glad she was that the lottery money would let Dad finally divorce you properly, now that he could afford it. She talked about the house they were looking at together. The house they were looking at together. With my lottery money, of course. In his mind, I was still supporting his dreams, even after divorcing him. Mom, I'm so sorry. I thought you were being too harsh, that you were letting money change you. But you weren't being harsh enough. You were protecting yourself from someone who never deserved you. After we hung up, I stood in my bright apartment looking out at the Manhattan skyline and felt a sense of completion I hadn't expected. The last nagging doubt about my decisions, the final whisper of guilt about breaking up my family, finally quieted. I called Sarah. Want to help me pack for Ireland? I asked. I leave in 2 weeks, and I have no idea what to bring. Absolutely, she said. But first, how do you feel about everything Jessica told you? Free, I said without hesitation. I feel completely free. The night before I left for Ireland, I had dinner with Sarah and Mark in my new apartment. I'd learned to cook properly over the past few months, taking classes and experimenting with recipes I'd always wanted to try but never had time for. Tonight's dinner was lamb with rosemary potatoes, a practice run for the Irish meals I'd be eating soon. I'm proud of you, Grandma, Sarah said as we shared a bottle of wine. You've changed so much in just 6 months. Have I changed? I asked. Or have I just become more myself? Maybe they're the same thing, Mark suggested. Maybe changing means becoming who you were meant to be all along. After they left, I sat on my small balcony with a cup of tea, watching the sun set over the city that had been my home for 40 years but had never felt like mine until now. Tomorrow I would board a plane to Dublin, something 20-year-old Linda had dreamed of and 68-year-old Linda was finally brave enough to do. The Ireland trip was everything I had hoped it would be and more. The countryside was greener than any photograph could capture. The people were warm and welcoming, especially when I told them I was looking for traces of my great-grandmother's family. In a small pub in County Cork, I met a distant cousin who remembered stories about the woman who had sailed to America in 1898 with nothing but a suitcase and a prayer. She was brave, your great-grandmother, he told me over pints of Guinness. Leaving everything she knew to start over in a new country. That takes real courage. Starting over takes courage at any age, I replied, thinking about my own new beginning. I hired a genealogist who helped me trace my family history back several generations. We found records of births and deaths, marriages and emigrations, the ordinary dramas of people trying to build good lives for themselves and their children. Looking at those old documents, I realized I was part of a long line of women who had made difficult choices, who had left familiar places to find better ones. On my last day in Ireland, I stood on the cliffs of Moher watching waves crash against rocks that had been there for thousands of years. The wind was strong enough to lean into, and the sky was the kind of gray that made the green grass seem to glow. I felt more connected to myself and to my history than I had ever felt sitting in that cramped apartment in New York, trying to make everyone else happy. I bought postcards but had no one to send them to. Robert and I weren't speaking. My children were still adjusting to the new version of their mother, the one who put herself first sometimes. But I didn't feel lonely. For the first time in my life, I enjoyed my own company. When I returned to New York, my apartment felt like home in a way no place ever had before. I'd hung my watercolor paintings on the walls, filled the bookshelves with books I wanted to read, arranged flowers in vases just because they made me happy. It was a space designed around my preferences, my comfort, my joy. A few weeks after I returned from Ireland, I got another unexpected phone call. This time it was Robert. Linda, he said, his voice careful and formal. I hope your trip was good. It was wonderful, I replied truthfully. Listen, I wanted to call because, well, Claire and I are getting married next month. I waited for the pain, the jealousy, the sense of betrayal. But all I felt was a mild curiosity about why he was telling me. Congratulations, I said, and meant it. That's it? Congratulations? What else would you like me to say? I thought. I don't know. I thought you'd be upset. Robert, you divorced me to be with her. Why would I be upset that you're making it official? Long pause. Are you seeing anyone? The question surprised me. Why? Just curious. You seem different. Happy, I guess. I was happy. Happier than I'd been in decades. But it wasn't because I was seeing anyone. It was because I was finally seeing myself clearly. I'm dating myself, I said. Taking myself to museums and trying new restaurants and buying myself flowers on Tuesdays for no reason. It's going very well. After I hung up, I realized that conversation had been the final test I didn't know I was taking. 6 months ago, hearing that Robert was remarrying would have devastated me. It would have felt like proof that I was unlovable, that I'd been right to accept whatever scraps of affection he'd offered. Now it just felt like information. Something that was happening to someone else, someone I used to know but no longer had much in common with. That evening, I cooked dinner for one and ate it while reading a book about art history. I'd signed up for a trip to Italy next spring, a painting workshop in Tuscany where I'd learn to capture light and landscape on canvas. After Italy, maybe Greece. Maybe France. Maybe all the places 20-year-old Linda had wanted to see, experienced through the eyes of a woman who finally understood her own worth. As I got ready for bed, I looked in the bathroom mirror and saw someone I was still getting to know but was learning to like. My hair had grown longer, softer. My face had more color from recent travels and outdoor activities. My eyes looked brighter, less guarded. I looked like someone who was living her life instead of just enduring it. 6 months later, on a warm day in April, I was sitting in my favorite cafe in Brooklyn Heights when a woman approached my table. Excuse me, she said hesitantly. Are you Linda Williams? I looked up from my sketchbook where I'd been drawing the view of the harbor. The woman was younger than me, maybe in her 50s, with tired eyes and careful posture that reminded me of someone. Yes, I said. Do we know each other? I'm Amy Fletcher. My husband worked with Robert. I heard about your divorce, and I wondered if I could ask you something. She sat down across from me without waiting for permission, and I saw desperation in her expression that I recognized from my own mirror a year ago. How did you know? She asked. How did you know it was time to leave? I closed my sketchbook and really looked at this woman who'd sought me out. The careful way she held herself, like someone braced for disappointment. The wedding ring she wore despite clearly suspecting her marriage was in trouble. The hope and fear battling in her face. I didn't know, I said honestly. I just reached a point where I was more afraid of staying than leaving. She nodded, tears filling her eyes. He's having an affair. My husband. I found out last month, and he's promising to end it, but you don't believe him. I don't know what to believe anymore. We've been married 26 years. We have 3 kids. I don't know how to be alone at my age. I thought about all the answers I could give her. Practical advice about lawyers and finances. Emotional support about self-worth and new beginnings. But instead, I asked her the question someone had asked me. What do you want your life to look like? She stared at me for a long moment. I want to matter, she whispered. I want to feel like I matter to someone, even if it's just myself. Then you already know what you need to do, I said gently. The question isn't whether you can survive alone. The question is whether you can survive staying with someone who makes you feel like you don't matter. We talked for 2 hours. I told her about the lottery ticket and the overheard phone call, about the years of small betrayals that had prepared me for the big one. I told her about Sarah's support and the lawyer meetings and the terrifying, exhilarating process of building a life designed around my own happiness. When she left, she hugged me tight. Thank you, she said, for showing me it's possible. After she was gone, I sat in the cafe a little longer, thinking about how strange it was to have become an example of something. A year ago, I was the cautionary tale, the woman who stayed too long, who accepted too little, who disappeared into other people's needs until she forgot herself entirely. Now I was something different. Someone who had found the courage to choose herself, even when it meant choosing the unknown. That night, I called Sarah to tell her about the encounter. You're becoming a role model, Grandma, she said with pride in her voice. A symbol of what's possible when women refuse to accept less than they deserve. I don't know about that, I said. I just know I'm happier than I've ever been. That's exactly why you're a role model. As I settled into bed that night in my bright apartment filled with my books and my paintings and the silence I'd learned to love, I thought about the woman who'd approached me today. I hoped she'd find the courage to choose herself. I hoped she'd discover what I'd learned, that the life you build for yourself is always better than the life you settle for. Tomorrow I would continue painting. Next week I would visit a new museum. Next month I would celebrate my 70th birthday by taking myself to dinner at the fanciest restaurant in the city and ordering everything that looked delicious without checking the prices. And someday, maybe soon, another woman would ask me how I knew it was time to choose myself. And I would tell her the same thing I'd told Amy Fletcher: you don't have to know. You just have to be willing to find out. The lottery ticket had made me rich in dollars. But choosing to value myself had made me rich in ways that no amount of money could buy. If you're listening to this story and recognizing pieces of your own life, if you've ever felt invisible in your own home or wondered if you're asking for too much when you ask for respect, I want you to know something: you matter. Your dreams matter. Your happiness matters. It's never too late to choose yourself, even if it's scary, even if people call you selfish, even if you're not sure who you are when nobody needs anything from you. Have you ever lived through something similar? Have you ever chosen to start over when it seemed impossible? Leave a comment below and tell me your story. I want to hear from you. And if this video resonated with you, please like it and subscribe. It helps me reach other people who might need to hear that they deserve better, that it's never too late to become the protagonist of their own story. Thank you for listening, and remember, the best chapters of your life might still be unwritten.